Welcome. Today I'm joined by Elijah, who is a scientist and also spiritual teacher and shamanic practitioner. So he has a lot to share about self-care, and we'll be talking about our best practices for what to do when life is really hard. If you want more content, please sign up for my newsletter at leaderforgood.com.
So
at the moment I notice in my environment and also when I work with clients that a lot of people are going through challenging times and things really are not easy for them. And so I was wondering if you have some advice for how to deal with that.
sure. Yeah, one thing is just to be compassionate with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy. We all have so many, or I guess maybe not all, but most of us have a lot of pressures. We have a lot of expectations on ourselves. Other people have expectations on us. And it's just, when things are going rough, it's just harder. And it's really, I think, important to be, mindful of that and to, just realize that you may not be able to get as much done, or you may be a bit more crabby, or you may not have your A game. And I think it's just part of being human is that, things just don't go as well when things are rough.
Yeah, and I know for a lot of people, it's actually really hard to be compassionate with ourselves. And there's this quote that I really like, if your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete.
Is that from the Buddha, or who is it from?
I'm not sure if it's actually from the Buddha, but it's probably attributed to the Buddha. There are all
Okay.
these quotes that are Buddha quotes that may or may not be actually Buddha quotes.
Right.
Do you have any advice on how to be more compassionate with yourself, though?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on what's your cup of tea. There's a lot in psychology. There's a lot in different spiritual paths. Most of them have some types of approaches or ways to do that. And the reason they have it is because most people aren't good at it. If people were really good at being compassionate with themselves, so many groups wouldn't have practices to teach you how to do it.
Yeah, there's this
it's not something we're taught in culture.
Right, if we treated other people like we treat ourselves, we'd all be in jail.
Yeah, or even we get a lot of times you get incentivized for pushing really hard, for working long hours, for being willing to withstand pain and discomfort. You don't really get any kudos externally from being compassionate with yourself. In almost any circumstance, but my God, it's so important and so valuable.
Yeah. So I guess one thing is to really monitor when self-talk and notice when it's being overly negative. I'm also noticing, so I came up with a good guideline, and that's when I haven't slept well. There's all this research how when we haven't slept well, it's impacting us and how we view the world more negatively. And yeah, just we're really not on our A game. And that whatever I think about my life when I haven't slept well or about myself, that I'm just not taking that seriously, because I know that it's basically I have my gray color glasses on. So it's
that's excellent.
biased. Yeah. So that's one advice that I sometimes also give people.
Yeah, I really like that, because it's almost like, would you make a major life decision when you're drunk? I hope not. If you're if you're in a pissy mood and haven't slept well, try to be a bit more resourced if you can be to handle a lot of, to make decisions like that. It's such a good idea.
Yeah, and I know as we're talking earlier about what to share here, you mentioned how there can be all these different reasons for why people are having a tough time. You mentioned how it could be something that's going on the macro level, where it could be politics, could be the news, could be any catastrophes that are happening, or it could be something that's very personal, like death in the family or illnesses and so on and so forth. And I'm wondering if you have different ways how you support people depending on what it is.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's to some degree like things where, if you pay less attention to them, it can be helpful, like, or you can get some perspective on it, like, because often, it's like, well, I want things to be this way, but then I read the news and so is behaving, this other way I don't like. And so then it's like, I mean, is it possible to, like, take in less news for a while? Because, if you don't read the news, things still happen. I mean, there's nothing like if you just take a bit of a news break, that's gonna, it's not like the world revolves around you reading the news. It's most certainly does not. And if you think it does, that's an excellent reason for like a news fast to
Yeah, and
test that hypothesis.
And I actually wrote an article about that and did some research on it. And it seems that people are more negative and tend to catastrophize and worry more if they have read negative news bulletins versus positive or neutral ones. And of course, most of the news we read is negative.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think like the news organizations, like I totally get why they, they're there to, capture your attention, to sell ads, and also deliver a valuable service of informing and uncovering wrongdoing and so forth. But the challenge is, it like we have so much going on, and it needs that, like, it's like the urgency needs to be higher for us to pay attention to it. Like, I think you were telling me once, like there was some writing course you took where if people weren't like getting hooked enough, raise the stakes. Like, the family's in danger, the town's in danger. If that's not enough, the country. If that's enough, the whole human civilization.
Yeah.
And so there's a way that like there's this elevation of stakes to kind of break through. Like, I could be hanging out with you, I could be doing something fun, I could be this or that, but no, I'm gonna read the news. Well, it must feel really important, to do that. So they find ways to make it feel really important to have tuned in on whatever frequency.
Yeah, it reminds me of this news about my death are greatly exaggerated. Yeah, and I think it's actually gotten worse with online news, because before you only had a certain amount of space in the paper. So of course you would always pick the stuff that's most relevant, most important. And now you're basically forced, like people are forced to publish constantly, which basically means, I mean, I know times when I looked at a breaking story and I read it from all these different news sources, it was basically the same. There's like no extra information. And yeah, so I think it's really crucial nowadays to learn how to consciously deal with the news, because
Yeah, I think
it can really impact us.
yeah, totally. I mean, it gets into mindfulness and being conscious of where you're putting your time and attention. And I think also really evaluating, like, what's the impact on this for me? What are the benefits from it? Because a lot of things, especially if things are like the good way to do things in society, it's a great reason to be suspicious of, is that really true? And, who's choosing this? And
Yeah, who's benefiting from that? Who is a
yeah.
stakeholder in this? Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes you can evaluate and it's like, oh yeah, actually that's really valuable. And it, like like voting, for example. Like I think there's like I don't know, I think there's value in civic duty, even though like the likelihood of your vote's going to be, some minuscule amount. I mean, there's like, if everyone's doing it, you get into a big problem. So I think there's really value, and also just like energetically and in terms of your intention and putting your influence in the world. Like there's something really, like I really like it, and think that's one thing that, yeah, I would encourage that to be like a should or something you should do generally.
And I mean,
But
there are countries where you are forced to
it's
vote.
compulsory. Yeah. Or you pay a fine or what have you.
I mean, as long as you can, I think that's fine, as long as you can kind of not, kind of like hand in an empty vote or something like that. If you're like, yeah, I can't get behind any of these people. I mean, I think otherwise it's a, huh?
Your vote's predetermined. You don't even.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I already know who I'm voting for.
Yeah,
they told me.
Yeah. Right.
So I think there's a lot with discernment, and it's really good to question, because I think when we get in these, when we're having a tough time, we're less resourced. We're more likely to be, anxious and, like not on our A game. And so a lot of these, manipulations, like whether it's marketing or the FOMO, or if you're missing out, and a lot of these pressures, they can become even more enticing. It's like you're just more susceptible, I think, when you're not at your top. So
Yeah.
it's a great reason to even be more sensitive to, is this helpful for me now? Would I really be better sort of doing this? Or could I just, take a nice bath, or, like take a little siesta, or, like what would
Go for
really
a
be,
walk. Yeah.
go for a walk? There's so many things that it can be rejuvenating and really helpful during these times. And sometimes, just vegging out, like, yeah, that can be an option, but I think there's it's important to be mindful, like, yeah, I need that now, rather than just like, turn Netflix show 10 hours later. That was a good series. And then, like it's already dark outside, and what happened to my day? There's a risk for so many things that are, I think with like the internet, they're like, they get such quick feedback, they can design things to be very addictive. Like I know one of your ideas was to like stop the autoplay on Netflix, because it's designed to like keep you watching more, like
Yes.
making their product more dispensable. It's not designed for overall well-being and harmony and peacefulness. It's designed for them profiting.
Yeah, I read a really great book about that I can put in the show notes. Your Attention Was Hacked. And
Yeah,
it mentioned how a lot of the social media services are basically using the same principle that Las Vegas casinos are
totally.
using, and it's really just to keep us addicted. Then there are things that can help counteract that. For instance, with your phone, if you put everything in black and white, so the notifications are not red or some other bright colors, that can actually really help curb
Or just even
that.
turn off the notifications. Like you don't
Yeah,
need to text
I
when
totally agree, because I often talk to people and they're
there's
like,
this
"Oh,
happening.
like I'm so undisciplined with social media." It's like, no, you're not undisciplined. They're intentionally making it addictive.
Well, it's kind of like the easiest way to not lose money at a casino is to not walk into the casino.
Yeah,
So if you disable the ways that they're going to use to manipulate you, like some of the things you're saying, like, and I was saying, like, not, don't get notifications, make them more boring,
yeah,
so on and so forth. You don't have to have a choice of not following it.
yeah,
Like, like the way we had there's any number of things where it's like, oh, it's easier to not eat chips if you don't buy chips in the first place.
yeah, right, yeah,
It's so much harder if they're sitting there, just one that's right there. Yeah, so I think, yeah. And the nice thing about this is, these kind of, I don't know, call them hacks or approaches, is that you can do them when you're really well resourced. Like it's that way whenever you're in some of these tough states. You're not trying to like, fight against all the manipulations and, coercions and so forth that these things have.
yeah, right. Because if you're in a bad mood but you don't have all this junk food at home, it's less likely that you're going to eat that junk food because you need to go out
Totally.
and get it, and so on and so forth. And like maybe sometimes eating junk food is what it takes.
Yeah, like I think we're both kind of the mind of like it's rarely something is where most things are a good idea or can be an okay idea sometimes.
Yeah,
So,
everything in
it's not,
moderation, even moderation.
yeah. So like, yeah, junk food or this or that, like it can be just, if it's like, they're the main thing that you're eating, well, that's probably not the best idea. But,
Yeah.
now and then, you're having a rough day, whatever, just have a snack.
So what I'm taking away from what we just talked about is during challenging times, it's even more important and who we surround ourselves with, and who we let and what we let into our inner space, because we're less resourced, less capable of dealing with intrusions. And I think that can also apply to the people that we're seeing, that we spend time with.
Mm-hmm.
When we're in a good state, yeah, of course we can probably deal with an aggressive frenemy or or someone that we frequently get into really long drawn out arguments with. But when someone's already worn down, it's probably better to just be around people that you can trust to treat you how you need to be treated in that place.
Totally. And I'll suggest an additional thing of, if you're prone to being grumpy when you're tired and not nice to people around you, and like sometimes like I'll notice like, maybe I should just go to the other room. I feel like I'm just going to be grumpy, and then that's just not going to fight. So like, how can I preemptively avoid a fight?
Yeah.
I'll just like sequester myself for a bit, because it's really not about them. I'm just kind of feeling a bit uncomfortable. They're around me. They look like a good person to be uncomfortable with, or like you're to be grumpy with.
It reminded me of this. So as I randomly came across a website that dealt with self-defense, and basically the guy's main point was the best self-defense is just to not get into any into any fights, and just like proactively get out of the way. And I guess that's also perhaps true for, well, not getting into arguments when we're already in a low resource state, and the last thing we need is more
yeah
stuff.
Or even just have it, I mean, if you can just have perspective, like, yeah, I didn't sleep well last night, most likely I could get into a fight more readily today.
Yeah.
I'm gonna actually be really careful about that. Or
Not.
that work colleague who sometimes I argue with, maybe I'll just not meet with them today if I can avoid it. So like, we often have some space of like, don't put yourself in a situation that's going to be harder to handle well.
Yeah. Right.
If possible.
Yeah. So yeah, to summarize that, I mean, there's definitely stuff we can do ahead of time to make our life more, I guess, tough time proof. Not proof, but make it a bit nicer, more of a safe space for tough times, like
Totally.
removing notifications from our phones, or disabling autoplay on Netflix, getting people out of not interacting anymore with people who most of the time are not a good influence on us.
Yeah.
And finding people who actually are a good influence. And then there's stuff that we can do when we're in the midst of that, which is to, how would you put that? Like, what can people do if right now they're finding themselves in the midst of that, and there is no time for preparation or anything?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it can come down to like, well, like take a work situation, for example. The hardest task on your list that you've been avoiding for months is probably not the thing you're going to handle when you're like in a rough spot.
Right.
But maybe there's something that's a bit menial, it's a bit, yeah, you need to do it. And you can even save tasks like that. Like, hey, there's this thing I'm going to, have to copy stuff over, or it's menial, it's a bit boring. Maybe you can save it for, because sometimes you're going to be in this kind of a spot, and you can just do it then. And then, when you are in a better spot, you can handle some of the more challenging things.
Yeah.
So I guess it's like, try to link up your expectations of yourself and the responsibilities you're trying to complete with what you have available. I mean, in a way, it's common sense, but in a way, like, there's so much training, at least in the US, of like, you can do it, just, Nike, just do it. It's not like, well, just do it if you feel like you have the resources and you're in a good spot. Otherwise, find something easier to do and be gentle with yourself. That's like totally not in the culture.
Because I think, like, from a productivity standpoint, it's actually a terrible idea to keep on pushing. If you've already tried for a couple of hours and you're not getting any results, it's probably not going to go better the next couple of hours. So the best way would probably be to stop, do something else, and then the next day may be way easier. Like, I wrote an article about that. Often it's not actually time management that's a problem, but energy management.
Yep.
And that sometimes you can get so much done in an hour or 2 hours, and other times I mean, especially if you're dealing with something challenging, maybe an emergency situation in your family, or some terrible news that somehow impact you very deeply. I mean, if you can ignore that for the moment to get something done that needs to be done, yeah, of course, do that. And sometimes that's necessary, right? Like if you're working on filing a lawsuit with a deadline, you need to somehow find a way to get to a place where you can finish that. If you're a surgeon, you can't just stop treating patients because you're not feeling well. But I think in many situations that's not necessarily required. Mm-hmm. And we can kind of like manage our workload where we do easier things on a day like that where we have very little energy, and then do the harder stuff when we're on our A game. And just actually, like sometimes it can be I sometimes did that when I worked on my thesis, when I noticed I was in such a good flow state that I would stay until 4 a.m. I mean, wouldn't necessarily recommend that in terms, it's not the greatest like rhythm to get into. But yeah, I mean, I think on days when we're really on our A game, it can really make sense to work a bit longer.
Yeah, totally. And it also, I think, varies a lot if you're like a salaried person who's there some number of hours versus like an entrepreneur, where it doesn't matter how many hours you work, it matters what you get accomplished during that time.
Yeah.
So I think that, there's even going to be different strategies, based on, if you're salaried or not, or what you can do with your job. Like, even if you're, in a salary place, you could go take like a 15-minute walk. Like there's all kinds of, well, I'm recalling at least research says that, taking a walk in the middle of the day, especially after lunch, is awesome for getting your energy back up. So, I mean, you can try some things like that. And a lot of jobs, depending upon what it is, you may be able to walk outside, or you may be able to do something like that if you don't have meetings back to back. I mean, it's, if that's possible, there's a lot of ways that you can kind of, attune yourself, or maybe you just need a tea or something to get a little bit of caffeine.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. And where can people go find more about you? And we can also put that in the show notes.
Sure. So I guess overall, I'm a teacher in a spiritual path where we help people get in touch with our conscious nature, and have awakenings and do all kinds of awesome spiritual growth things. So I talked about it not too much today, but it's called Trillium Awakening, and you can put in the notes the link to my website in case you'd like to check it out more. But sometimes things are just a bit tough, and it's really nice to have someone to be with you and to support you with growing during the rocky spots.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you so much, Elijah.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
For listening.
Thank you everyone for listening. Take care.
Bye-bye. Did you enjoy this video? If so, let's stay in contact. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can also sign up for my email list at leaderforgood.com, and you'll not only receive a free Leader for Good meditation, but I'll also keep you in the loop about what I'm cooking up these days. I look forward to seeing you on the other side.